The shadow self is the unseen world within us, the side of the psyche that we hide, repress, or deny. It is made up of the impulses, emotions, desires, and traits we have been taught to label as unacceptable. Anger, envy, greed, pride, lust, selfishness, the aspects that conflict with our carefully constructed image of who we believe we are. From childhood, we learn which parts of us are rewarded and which are punished, which are lovable and which are not. Slowly, we begin to exile certain emotions and characteristics to the darkness of the unconscious. Yet what we banish does not disappear. It waits, it observes, it grows stronger in silence. The shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply unacknowledged. It carries both the destructive and creative forces of human nature. Within it lies our repressed potential, our forgotten vitality, our raw instinct, and our deepest truths. But because it operates outside of our awareness, it influences our lives in ways we cannot see. The more we deny it, the more power it gains. The shadow does not vanish through suppression, it manifests through projection. We see it in others, we judge it, and we fear it, never realizing that it mirrors what we refuse to face within ourselves. In the context of relationships, especially those involving narcissistic dynamics, the shadow plays a profound role. The narcissist is someone who has completely rejected their own shadow. Their entire identity depends on maintaining an image of superiority, control, and perfection. To admit vulnerability or imperfection would mean confronting the shadow, the parts of themselves they despise. So instead, they split their psyche in two. The glorified persona they show the world and the rejected self that hides beneath it. What they cannot integrate internally, they externalize. They seek others to carry their shadow for them. When they meet someone empathic, intuitive, and emotionally grounded, that person becomes the canvas upon which the narcissist paints all their hidden fears and shame. You begin to embody the qualities they cannot tolerate in themselves: sensitivity, emotional depth, authenticity. What they repress, they now see in you, and rather than accept it, they attack or demean it. It is their unconscious way of rejecting their own shadow again and again. This is why their relationships feel like cycles of idealization and devaluation. When they first meet you, they project the best of themselves onto you, the light they wish they had. But as the illusion fades and your realness begins to reflect their denied parts, they grow hostile. To them, your authenticity becomes a threat. Every human being carries this inner conflict, but the narcissist is ruled by it. They are constantly at war with the self they cannot face. The shadow haunts them through jealousy, rage, and emptiness. It whispers that they are unworthy, insignificant, and ordinary. To drown out that voice, they chase admiration, status, and control. Yet, the more they inflate their persona, the more their shadow grows. Their charm, their manipulation, even their cruelty are attempts to silence the darkness they refuse to meet. But the shadow is patient. It does not disappear when ignored. It becomes the unseen puppeteer behind their actions, pulling strings of fear and desire. For those who have loved someone like this, the shadow teaches a painful but transformative lesson. When you are drawn to a narcissist, it is often your own shadow that feels the pull. Their grandiosity may reflect your hidden longing to feel powerful. Their coldness may awaken your buried wounds of unworthiness. The connection feels magnetic because, on some level, your unconscious recognizes a mirror. They embody both what you desire and what you fear within yourself. And when the relationship collapses, what remains is not just heartbreak, but an invitation to meet your own shadow, to reclaim what you have disowned, to see what was projected and taken back into awareness. The shadow self demands honesty without judgment. It is not to be conquered but understood. It speaks through discomfort, jealousy, resentment, and fear, revealing the truths we hide even from ourselves. To engage with it is to reclaim wholeness, to step out of illusion, and to see reality without distortion. The narcissist runs from this inner confrontation, but those who face it begin to integrate what was once divided. The mask, or persona, is the social face we wear to meet the expectations of the world. It is the version of ourselves we craft to be accepted, admired, and understood. It begins as a necessary adaptation, a bridge between the inner self and the outer world. We learn early in life that we must behave a certain way to be loved or respected. We learn to smile when we are hurt, to agree when we disagree, to appear confident when we are afraid. The persona becomes our armor, protecting us from rejection and judgment. But over time, what was once a mask we put on becomes a face we cannot take off. We start to believe we are the mask. The line between performance and authenticity blurs until we no longer know who we are beneath the roles we play. For most people, the persona serves a practical purpose. It helps us navigate society and communicate in ways that maintain harmony. But for the narcissist, the persona is not just a tool, it is their entire identity. Their sense of self is constructed out of the perceptions of others. They do not possess a stable inner core. They rely on constant external validation to confirm their worth. Their mask is dazzling, seductive, and carefully curated. It reflects exactly what their audience wants to see: confidence, charisma, beauty, success. Yet behind this image lies profound emptiness, a void where the authentic self should be. The persona becomes a prison of their own creation. Every relationship the narcissist forms revolves around the maintenance of this mask. They select people who will mirror their false image back to them, reinforcing the illusion of greatness they have built. You may have been drawn to them not because of who they truly are, but because of how masterfully they crafted their mask. They knew how to reflect your desires, your ideals, your fantasies. They studied your emotional language and mirrored it perfectly, creating a sense of instant connection. This is not love, it is psychological mimicry. You were not meeting a real person, you were meeting the mask. The mask serves another function. It hides the shadow. The narcissist's public charm is often a defense against unbearable shame. Their arrogance conceals fragility. Their control conceals fear. Their confidence conceals emptiness. The persona allows them to project strength while denying their vulnerability. But because the mask is artificial, it must constantly be maintained. The slightest hint of exposure, a moment when you see behind the facade triggers panic. That is when their behavior shifts. The warmth turns cold, the admiration turns into contempt. You have seen too much, you have threatened the illusion. To preserve the mask, they must devalue you. Their attachment to the persona is not conscious deceit, it is psychological survival. To them, being seen without the mask feels like annihilation. The authentic self has been buried so long that it no longer feels safe to exist. The narcissist believes they are the mask that without admiration they will cease to exist. Every compliment, every conquest, every performance becomes a way to keep their fragile sense of identity alive. The mask must shine brightly enough to distract them and everyone else from the darkness underneath. This is why their relationships are inherently unstable. The mask cannot sustain intimacy because intimacy requires truth. True connection demands vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens to crack the facade. So when you reach for closeness, they retreat behind performance. When you seek honesty, they give you charm. When you confront them, they turn defensive or cruel. The mask does not allow for equality. It requires control. You become an audience, not a partner. Eventually, the mask grows heavy, and the narcissist must find a new stage. They leave not because they have found someone better, but because they need someone new to believe in the performance. The new person becomes the next witness to the illusion, another mirror to reflect back the persona. It is never about love, it is about preservation. They move from one audience to another, desperate to sustain the false self that cannot survive without attention. The tragedy of the mask is that it hides not only the darkness, but also the light. Beneath it lies the real self, vulnerable, wounded, human, but it has been silenced for so long that it no longer knows how to speak. Projection is one of the most intricate psychological defenses, the mind's way of avoiding internal conflict by casting what is intolerable within onto the world outside. It happens when an individual attributes their own unacceptable emotions, motives, or flaws to another person. The mind does this unconsciously to preserve its sense of purity and control. Rather than acknowledging feelings of envy, guilt, or fear, the psyche externalizes them, transforming what is mine into yours. This mechanism allows a person to maintain a self-image that remains untarnished by the very qualities they secretly possess. But projection, though it feels protective, distorts reality. It replaces self-awareness with illusion and erodes the possibility of genuine connection. In the narcissistic psyche, projection is not just a defense, it is a survival strategy. The narcissist's identity depends entirely on maintaining a grand image of superiority, perfection, and power. Any glimpse of vulnerability threatens to unravel the fragile structure of this illusion. They cannot tolerate the idea that they might be flawed, insecure, or cool. So they unconsciously deposit these unwanted traits into others. If they feel envy, they accuse others of being jealous. If they feel guilt, they label others as manipulative. If they sense weakness, they ridicule those around them as fragile or overly emotional. In doing so, they preserve the fantasy of being above reproach while forcing others to carry the emotional burdens they deny. When you are in a relationship with a narcissist, projection becomes the invisible thread that weaves the dynamic together. You may start noticing how their accusations feel strangely misplaced, how they describe you in ways that do not fit your reality. They call you selfish when you express your needs, controlling when you set boundaries, cold when you begin to detach. Each accusation is a reflection of what they refuse to see within themselves. It is as though they are holding up a mirror, but they have turned it outward, forcing you to bear the reflection of their own hidden face. Over time, their projections can begin to infiltrate your sense of self. You start questioning your own character, wondering if you truly are the person they describe. This confusion is not accidental, it is the psychological effect of absorbing someone else's disowned emotion. Projection also explains the emotional volatility of narcissistic relationships. The narcissist's internal world is chaotic, filled with contradictions they cannot reconcile. Because they cannot regulate their emotions or take responsibility for them, they project them onto others and then attack those very qualities. It is a form of psychic cleansing. They rid themselves of shame by making you feel ashamed, of anger by provoking you to rage, of insecurity by undermining your confidence. The relationship becomes a theater of projections, where you are cast in roles that serve their unconscious narrative. You are alternately idealized and vilified, depending on which parts of their inner world they are trying to disown in that moment. The mechanism of projection extends beyond personal relationships. It shapes entire social interactions and group dynamics. On a collective level, people project their unacknowledged fears and desires onto other communities, ideologies, or figures. The process is ancient, the creation of scapegoats to carry what society cannot bear to see within itself. The narcissist enacts this same drama on an intimate scale. Their partner becomes the scapegoat for every unintegrated emotion they refuse to confront. They need you to hold the parts of them that feel unworthy, the shadow they cannot claim. The more you carry their projections, the lighter they feel temporarily. But because projection never resolves the inner conflict, it must repeat endlessly. A psychological loop that feeds on new victims. To understand projection is to see how denial becomes aggression, how inner blindness becomes outer conflict. It reveals why arguments with such individuals feel circular, why no amount of reasoning seems to penetrate the distortion. You are not dealing with conscious deception. You are confronting a psyche at war with itself. The narcissist does not see you as you are. They see the rejected parts of themselves animated in your image. What you experience as unfair criticism or emotional assault is, in truth, their desperate attempt to expel their own pain. To them, you are both the mirror and the enemy, the reflection and the threat. The wound itself is the hidden core that lies beneath every defense, every mask, every projection. It is the place where pain first took root, the moment the child learned that love could be conditional, that approval could be withdrawn, that being seen was dangerous. It is the original fracture in the psyche, the birth of shame and the death of innocence. This wound is not always the result of overt trauma. Sometimes it forms in quiet neglect, in subtle dismissals, in the silent message that one must perform to be valued. Over time, the wound becomes an internal narrative. I am not enough as I am. From that story, a lifetime of compensations unfolds. The person builds an identity around avoiding the pain of that truth. In the narcissist, the wound itself is buried beneath layers of denial and grandiosity. Their apparent confidence is not genuine strength, but the armor forged to protect the fragile core. At some point, they experienced a profound rupture of self-worth, a moment when their authentic emotions were met not with empathy, but with ridicule, rejection, or indifference. Instead of processing that pain, the psyche split. One part remained the helpless child, frozen in shame. The other part became the false self, designed to ensure such vulnerability would never be exposed again. This false self becomes the idealized image of perfection, powerful, beautiful, unbreakable. But beneath that brilliance, the wound itself continues to ache, unseen and unhealed. Everything the narcissist does is an attempt to soothe that inner pain without ever confronting it. Their hunger for admiration is not vanity, but anesthesia. The compliments, achievements, and attention act as temporary bandages, silencing the voice of inadequacy that echoes in their subconscious. Yet no amount of external validation can reach the wound, because the wound exists in the place where the real self was abandoned. The narcissist cannot receive love, only supply. Love requires openness, vulnerability, and trust qualities the wound itself associates with danger. So when genuine affection appears, it triggers not comfort but terror. The narcissist feels exposed, unguarded, reminded of the original helplessness they swore to never feel again. That is why they often destroy the very connection they crave. To them, intimacy feels like a threat to survival. The wound itself manifests as a void, a bottomless hunger that no partner, success or praise can fill. This void is not just emotional, it becomes existential. The narcissist does not truly know who they are without external reflection. Their sense of identity depends on the reactions of others, so they constantly manipulate their surroundings to maintain the illusion of significance. Every compliment becomes proof of existence. Every criticism feels like annihilation. This is why they swing between superiority and victimhood, two sides of the same wound. The superiority shields them from shame. The victimhood seeks rescue from it.
Both are cries for the same impossible healing, to be unconditionally seen and accepted, yet too terrified to allow that seeing to happen.
When you become close to someone carrying such a wound, you are drawn into its gravitational pull. Their pain resonates with your empathy. Their vulnerability evokes your compassion. But soon, you notice that their need is insatiable. No reassurance ever lasts. You begin to feel responsible for keeping them emotionally alive, even as your own light begins to dim. This is not love. It is enmeshment with another person's unresolved trauma. The narcissist unconsciously uses you to stabilize their identity, to regulate emotions they cannot face alone. You become the caretaker of their wounded self while they remain hidden behind the false one. And when you grow tired, when you stop feeding the illusion, they perceive it not as exhaustion but as betrayal. The wound reopens, the shame floods in, and they retaliate to escape it, often by abandoning or attacking the very person who once offered comfort. The wound itself is the silent architect behind every manipulation, every lie, every grand display of superiority. It is the ghost that haunts the narcissist's life, whispering that they are never enough. But instead of turning inward to listen, they turn outward to conquer, to charm, to control. Their relationships, careers, and identities become monuments built over the buried child within. And no matter how high those monuments rise, the foundation remains cracked, trembling under the weight of what was never healed. Individuation and awakening describe the process of becoming whole, the gradual reconciliation between who we appear to be and who we truly are. It is the journey of the self toward integration, a movement from fragmentation to authenticity.
Every person begins life divided between the inner and outer worlds, the internal voice of instinct, emotion, and intuition versus the external demands of family, culture, and expectation.
To survive, we adapt to the latter. We learn to wear masks, to suppress feelings, to conform to what will earn us belonging. But what we repress does not vanish. It waits beneath consciousness, shaping our choices, fears, and desires. Individuation begins when the buried parts start to call for recognition, when the psyche demands that we meet ourselves fully, without disguise. For those who have experienced relationships with narcissists or emotionally unavailable partners, individuation often begins in the ashes of that pain. The collapse of illusion becomes the catalyst for awakening. Being mirrored by a narcissist forces one to confront both shadow and light, the patterns of self-abandonment, the craving for approval, the internalized belief that love must be earned. The end of such a relationship is rarely just heartbreak. It is psychological initiation. The mask that the narcissist wears reflects not only their false self, but also the false selves we unconsciously maintain. Their inability to love authentically mirrors the parts of us that have settled for conditional love. When that bond shatters, what emerges is not simply loss, but revelation, the recognition that the very dynamic that caused our suffering also exposes where our own healing must begin. Individuation is not about perfection, but about integration. It means bringing together the fragmented aspects of the psyche, the persona, the shadow, the inner child, the wounded self, the forgotten instincts. It is the courageous act of reclaiming the disowned pieces of one's identity and learning to live from a place of inner unity rather than outer performance. During this process, illusions fall away, not only illusions about others, but about oneself. The individual begins to see how much of their life was lived in reaction, seeking validation, avoiding conflict, hiding pain. The awakening is uncomfortable because it dismantles the comfort of false narratives. Yet within that discomfort lies liberation. The moment we stop striving to be what the world expects, we begin to encounter what we truly are.
This process is not a sudden enlightenment, but a series of small deaths and rebirths. Each time an illusion dissolves, something within resists. The ego clings to what is familiar, even if it is painful.
But individuation asks for surrender, to let go of roles that no longer serve, to step into the unknown self that has been waiting. The awakening is often lonely at first because it separates us from the collective patterns of unconscious living. Those who once validated us may no longer understand us. The life that once seemed certain begins to feel hollow. Yet beneath that emptiness, a deeper foundation begins to form. A sense of inner authority, the ability to self-validate, the peace that comes from no longer betraying one's truth. In the framework of individuation, the narcissist represents the archetype of what happens when this process is resisted. They remain trapped in identification with the mask, terrified of the authentic self. Their energy is directed outward, toward control, admiration, performance, while their inner world remains barren. The person who confronts and survives such a relationship, however, is pushed in the opposite direction, inward, toward integration. The pain of being discarded or devalued becomes the spark that ignites the search for self. Through reflection, therapy, solitude, or spiritual practice, the individual begins to uncover the deeper patterns that attracted them to the illusion in the first place. The awakening is not about blaming the narcissist, but about seeing how both souls played roles in the larger drama of consciousness, seeking wholeness. Individuation and awakening demand honesty, the kind that dismantles identity and exposes the hidden architecture of the psyche. It is not a path of avoidance, but of confrontation, meeting the shadow with compassion, meeting the mask with humility, meeting the wound with tenderness. It requires patience and courage to face what has long been denied, to forgive what cannot be changed, and to embrace the paradox that healing is not the elimination of pain, but the acceptance of one's totality. Through this process, awareness expands beyond the personal. The individual begins to sense that the self is not a static thing, but a living process, a continual unfolding of consciousness, seeking to remember itself through every experience, even through suffering.